Hello and welcome to the wonderful world of Math Review. Today we're going to be looking at representing the equivalent fractions and comparing the fractions through practice point set 20, page 2. Let's go ahead and get started. So remember, the first thing we need to remember is that equivalent, or being equal to, means that they have the same value, they just might be written in different ways. So what number replaces the question mark to make the statement true? Well, remember, fractions are always fair. So what we do to the denominator, we always do to the numerator. And what we can see is that we know that something happens to go from 5 to 35. Since it's getting bigger, we know we're multiplying because it's all either multiplying or dividing. And since we're multiplying, we just have to figure out what are we multiplying by. Because whatever we multiply on the bottom, we have to multiply by on the top. So if we count up by our 5s, we can figure out what we're multiplying by, or you may know how many times 5 goes into 35 off the top of your head. But if we needed to figure it out, we could count up by 5s. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. Okay, that's 7. So we're timesing by 7. Again, if I do it on the bottom, I do it to the top because fractions are fair. 5 times 7 is 35. So 3 times 7 is 21. That question mark has to be a 21. We're going to do the same thing with question number 2. The only difference is that instead of getting bigger from the first fraction to the second, we're getting smaller. And remember what I said, that if you're getting smaller, you're not subtracting in these types of problems because it has to go down proportionally. So you're dividing. So I know I'm dividing. And whatever I divide the top by, I have to divide the bottom by. So what I'm going to ask myself is 8 divided by what will give me 2? Okay, and that's really the same as asking how many 2's go into 8. Well, 2, 4, 6, 8. That ends up 4 times. So if I do 8 divided by 4, or 8 split into 4 parts, I'm going to have 2 in each. So that works out perfect. If I do that to the top, I do it to the bottom. And 28 divided by 4 is 7. Number 3, write 2 equivalent fractions for 8/12. Show how they are equivalent. Okay, so remember, in order to make an equivalent fraction, I have so many options. They're really endless. But a couple things that make it easiest is it's always easiest to multiply instead of divide, but you can divide this one. I'll show one with multiplying and one with division. I think it's always easiest to multiply by 2's, 5's, 10's, but you can pick any number you want. The answer that I come up with here is not going to be the only right answer. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom both by 2, because remember, if I do it to the top, I have to do it to the bottom. 8 times 2 is 16, and 12 times 2 is 24. 16 24ths is an equivalent fraction to 8/12. Because I multiplied it by the same on the top and the bottom. Now, since 8/12 is a fraction that can be divided into equivalent fractions, I'm going to show you that too. Since they're both even numbers, I know I could divide them both by 2. So I have 8 divided by 2 and 12 divided by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 12 divided by 2 is 6. 4/6 is another equivalent fraction to 8/12. Like I said, there are plenty more options for answers as long as you did the same thing to the top and the bottom and it gives you a whole number answer, you did it right. For questions 4, 5, and 6, we're supposed to write a greater than, less than, or equals to sign. So remember, what we do is we cross multiply with our butterfly. So we draw our butterfly in, draw the antenna, and let's multiply across. 10 times 1 is 10. 2 times 9 is 18. 18 is bigger than 10, so my answer is a greater than symbol. On number 5, let's do the same thing. We have 9 times 3 gives us 27. And we have 4 times 7 gives us 28. So 28 is 1 bigger than 27, so we yet again are going to have a greater than symbol. On a question like this, we always first want to look at our whole numbers. Okay, they're both the same. So it's really like we can check those both off and focus on our fractions. So we can still cross multiply. We are just not going to include our whole numbers at all since we already determined they were equal. 8 times 1 is 8. 2 times 4 is also 8. And so our whole numbers and our fractions are equal. So our overall numbers are equal to each other. Last but not least, we're going to order this from least to greatest. Now we have a benchmark fraction here with 1/2. So if we were going to put it on a number line or think about it from 0 to 1, 1/2 would be right here in the middle. So now there's a couple other things that we can do. We look up here and we see we actually already answered this question up here, that 9/10 is bigger than 1/2. So we know that since it's bigger and we're doing greatest to least, that is going to go in front of 1/2. Now, we know those two in relation to each other, but we don't know the others. We do also see, though, that 1/5 and 3/5 both have the same denominator, and that therefore 3 is bigger than 1 and going to be a bigger fraction. But let's go ahead and check to see which is bigger, 1/2 or 1/5. You may already know this just based on your background knowledge, but if not, remember we can always cross multiply to see. 2 times 1 is 2, 5 times 1 is 5, and therefore we see that 1/2 is a bigger fraction. So 1/5 has to go after 1/2 since it is smaller. The last one we need to check is 3/5. Okay, well if I were to make this an equivalent fraction of the tenths, I would times it by 2 on the top and the bottom, and I would get that that was the same as 6/10. Well, if that's the case, I know that's smaller than 9/10. But is it smaller than 1/2, or will it meet in the middle? Well, you may be able to tell that 1/2 is the same as 5/10. And I did that by multiplying the top and the bottom by 5. 5/10 is smaller than 6/10, so 3/5 has to go in front of 1/2. There you have your order from greatest to least. If you have any questions, remember to ask your teacher.